You didn't get scapegoated because you were the weakest. You got scapegoated because you were the most aware. Not the most dramatic, not the most difficult, the most disruptive to their denial. Because in families built on image, not truth, the truth teller is always a threat. And if you threatened the story they needed to survive, you became the problem they needed to eliminate. Pause here. Who did your honesty make uncomfortable? Who in your family changed the subject when you named what was actually happening? When did speaking up start to feel dangerous? If you've ever been called the problem, when all you did was name the truth, if you've been punished for saying what everyone else was pretending not to feel, if your family still treats your boundaries like betrayal, this video is for you. It's not just about survival roles. It's about the scapegoat system, why it exists, how it chooses its target, and what it costs to finally walk away. Because scapegoating isn't just emotional abuse, it's a survival strategy. For them. And if you were the one chosen to carry the family's shadow, you deserve to know what you were really up against. In dysfunctional family systems, roles aren't assigned. They're absorbed. The golden child absorbs the hope. The lost child absorbs the silence. And the scapegoat, they absorb the tension, the unresolved, unspoken, intergenerational tension that nobody else wants to name. But here's the truth they don't want to admit. The scapegoat isn't the one who's broken. They're the one who won't participate in the illusion. Not because they're rebellious, but because they're awake. That's what makes them dangerous. Not their behavior, their clarity. Self-check. When you were younger, did it feel like you were always the one causing conflict, just by asking obvious questions? Did you notice things others ignored? Did you express pain and get labeled too sensitive? Let that sink in. What you called being difficult was actually your nervous system refusing to normalize dysfunction. You were responding to the damage, not creating it. This is the root of it. Truth disrupts hierarchy, and hierarchy is the only thing holding a dysfunctional family together. In a system that revolves around image, silence is loyalty, compliance is currency, and discomfort, especially emotional discomfort, is betrayal. So when you questioned the rules, when you refused to play your part, when you brought light into the shadow, you became unbearable. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right. Too early, too clearly, too often. Now here's where it gets surgical. Every black sheep learns early on a chilling equation. If I speak up, I lose connection. If I express pain, I become the problem. If I hold the mirror up, they'll break it and blame me for the shards. So you stop, not because you're passive, but because you're surviving. You trade truth for peace. You trade self-expression for acceptance. You learn to carry the family's shame because they refuse to. And that's how the loop begins. Philosopher Michel Foucault wrote about systems that maintain control not through force, but through internalized roles. That's what happened here. You weren't silenced by punishment. You were silenced by your own wiring, by a nervous system trained to believe that truth equals danger. When did you learn that your clarity came at a cost? What age were you when it became safer to stay silent than to be seen? These are not rhetorical questions. They are portals to the moment you left yourself to stay acceptable. And now, even as an adult, you feel it. that lingering fear that being fully honest will cost you something, that if you name what's real, someone will disappear, or turn cold, or twist the knife of guilt back into your spine. So how does this scapegoat pattern form? Why does one child become the truth teller and another the favored mask? What does the family gain from keeping you in that role? Let's dissect that next. Let's get one thing straight. The family didn't choose you because you were weak. They chose you because you were useful, not to hurt, to stabilize. Because every dysfunctional family system has a silent equation. Someone has to carry the shadow, so the rest of us can keep pretending. And if you were the one who asked hard questions, showed real emotion, or refused to perform, you became the sacrifice that held the illusion together. Pause here and reflect. Did the family seem calmer when you were in distress? Did people get along better when you were silent? Did your discomfort somehow bring the rest of them closer? That's not coincidence. That's systemic design. This isn't about blame. It's about structure. In psychology, this is called projective identification, a defense mechanism where a group projects what it can't bear to hold into a single target. Anger, shame, jealousy, pain. Instead of naming it, they offload it. And you become the emotional landfill, not because you are those things, but because you're willing to feel them when they won't. It's twisted logic, but here's how it works. If we can make you the problem, we don't have to look at ourselves. So they escalate your reactions. They provoke your sensitivity. They shame your boundaries until they can say, "See, you're the issue." Here's where it gets surgical. The outcast provides function. You become the lightning rod, absorbing chaos so the others don't have to face it. In some families, your distress is the glue that holds the group together. They gossip about you. They judge you. They unify through your rejection. Because without you, they'd have to face the truth about each other. So you're not just cast out. You're maintained in opposition. Not in the circle, but always orbiting, just close enough to blame, just far enough to never truly belong. Ask yourself this. Did you ever notice that when you improved, they got quieter? That your growth didn't bring closeness, just suspicion? That's because your role wasn't designed to evolve. It was designed to contain. And the moment you stopped participating in the story they needed to tell about you, they lost the narrative they were using to protect themselves. Let's pause here. What's the story your family tells about you? The one that always gets brought up at gatherings. The one that makes you feel small, simplified, misunderstood. That's the script. And if you deviate from it, they panic, because the script is what shields them from introspection. Let's go deeper. The hierarchy always needs an outlier. This is a principle found in religious mythology, corporate culture, and high control groups. The outcast reinforces the rules. By pushing someone to the margins, the group defines what normal is, what acceptable is, what safe looks like. And in your family, you became the what not to be, the emotional one, the rebellious one, the difficult one, not because it was true, but because someone had to be it. And the more authentic you became, the more they pushed you out. Because authenticity threatens conformity, and conformity is what kept the system stable. Murray Bowen, father of family systems theory, called this the identified patient. The one person in the system who absorbs the symptoms, so the rest can look functional. You might have been the one with the panic attacks, the depression, the acting out, the cutting, the anger, and they pathologized you, made you the topic of concern, sent you to therapy while they stayed the same. But what if your symptoms weren't dysfunction at all? What if they were the body's rebellion against a system that taught you love meant erasure? Let's reflect for a moment. What problems did you get labeled with growing up? Now ask, who benefited from that label? What did it allow others to ignore? These aren't just stories, they're power maps. So let's tell the truth. They didn't need you to get better. They needed you to stay broken so they could stay comfortable. That's why your healing didn't bring reunion. It brought rejection. Because once you stop playing the part, you break the play. And no one wants to rebuild the set when the illusion was working, at least for them. So if you were the scapegoat, and the scapegoat was never the problem, what were you actually seeing that no one else could name? What does it mean when the one who's cast out is the one closest to the truth? That's where we go next. Let's name what no one ever gave you permission to believe. You were right. Not perfect, not prophetic, but right about what was off, what was hidden, and what was never spoken. And the more you tried to name it, the more they insisted you were the issue. Not because you were wrong, but because your truth was inconvenient. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, what did you feel before anyone else admitted it? What patterns did you see before you had the language? What emotions were you shamed for that later revealed themselves as warnings? These weren't flaws. They were data. And you were reading the system in real time. This is what makes the scapegoat dangerous. They are often the system's most emotionally intelligent member, not the loudest, the clearest. While others were numbing, denying, or performing, you were tracking. You noticed the tone change, the emotional whiplash, the shift in energy when truth entered the room. That sensitivity? That wasn't weakness. It was attunement. In myth and psychology alike, this is the seer archetype, the one who perceives what others ignore, not because they want to, because they have to. In survival systems, insight becomes armor. If you don't notice what's unspoken, you get blindsided. If you don't read the subtext, you get hurt. So you become the translator, the interpreter, the one who notices the crack in the mask before it shatters. And that awareness, over time, becomes a burden, because no one else is ready to carry it. Philosopher Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Apply that to family. It is no measure of brokenness to be rejected by a profoundly dishonest system, because when a family rewards denial and punishes perception, sanity will look like rebellion. Self-reflection check. Did you ever see through people's performances and get punished for it? Were you the first to say, "That doesn't feel right," and the last to be believed? That's not delusion, that's sensitivity. And in most family systems, it's treated like sabotage. Because here's what they'll never admit. They weren't angry that you were wrong. They were terrified that you were right. Let's talk trauma for a moment. Most trauma isn't what happened. It's what was never acknowledged. The pain, the betrayal, the emotional violence. And you? You were the one trying to name it. to bring coherence where there was only chaos. You were the one who asked, "Why is everyone pretending this is fine?" That question alone is enough to get you cast out, because silence maintains order, and questions collapse it. There's a chilling clarity here. You weren't scapegoated because you failed. You were scapegoated because you saw what others ignored, what others couldn't name, what others twisted into performance or persona. That's why your presence disrupted the script, because the system relied on forgetting, and you remembered everything. The tone of voice, the rules that changed mid-conversation, the way love disappeared when you stopped performing. You remembered. And in a family built on amnesia, memory is rebellion. Here's where it lands. The scapegoat holds the map, the full emotional record, the truth of what happened, and the clarity to know it wasn't okay. And that map, it's not just memory, it's blueprint. Because healing doesn't begin with affirmation, it begins with clarity. And no one in that house gave it to you. So you built it yourself, through fragments, through self-reflection, through invisible wounds that refused to close without truth. Let's pause to reflect. What do you know now that they still deny? What patterns do you still carry because no one else had the courage to name them? What pain still feels sharp because it was never seen? That pain isn't weakness, it's evidence, and in time, it becomes direction. The role of the scapegoat isn't just to be cast out, it's to outgrow the story that cast them, to stop playing the role, to stop carrying the projections, to stop confusing clarity with cruelty. You weren't cruel, you were honest, and in systems like these, that's enough to get you punished. But also, it's the first sign you were never meant to stay there. So if you've seen the truth, why does it still hurt? Why, after all the clarity, the boundaries, the distance, do you still feel like the bad one? Let's unpack that guilt next, because the punishment may be over, but the programming isn't. You've done the work, you've drawn the boundaries, you've named the truth they spent decades burying, so why do you still feel like the villain? That's not weakness, that's programmed guilt. Not guilt from doing harm, guilt from breaking the role you were trained to perform. Here's what most people miss. Guilt isn't always moral. Sometimes it's structural. A nervous system conditioned to associate truth with punishment. From childhood, every time you told the truth and were met with silence, shame, or withdrawal, your body learned a pattern. If I speak honestly, I lose connection. If I assert myself, I become the bad one. If I stop performing, I get punished. Not just emotionally, biologically. And now, even when you know you're right, you still feel wrong. Have you ever apologized? Not because you were sorry, but because you couldn't tolerate their coldness. Have you felt more shame for saying no than you did for being neglected? That's not conscience. That's conditioning. And it started before you had the words to fight it. Psychologist Alice Miller called this the guilt trap of the good child. When your only way to feel safe was to suppress your needs. Guilt became a form of control, internally maintained, self-reinforcing. You didn't need to be punished. You punished yourself. Every time you hesitated to speak, every time you second-guessed your pain, every time you told yourself, maybe I'm just being dramatic. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am the problem. That wasn't self-doubt. That was emotional programming. Let's dissect how it works. Programmed guilt has 3 core mechanisms. 1. Misplaced responsibility. You were trained to manage their emotions, so now you feel responsible for everyone's discomfort. 2. Reward withdrawal. Affection was given when you complied, withdrawn when you expressed need. So you learned. Closeness must be earned through self-abandonment. 3. Moral reversal. Kindness gets framed as cruelty. Boundaries get framed as betrayal. And the more you try to protect yourself, the more selfish you feel. That's not intuition. That's indoctrination. Take a moment to reflect. What were you made to feel guilty for? Having needs, setting boundaries, feeling exhausted? Now ask, who benefited from you carrying that guilt? That guilt didn't protect them. It protected the system. Because as long as you felt wrong for breaking the script, you were still emotionally tethered to it. Let's name the deeper layer. This guilt isn't yours. It was handed to you, strategically, because as long as you carry it, they don't have to carry accountability. Philosopher René Girard described scapegoating as a mechanism for restoring social order. By blaming one person for the chaos of the collective, you weren't just blamed, you were used to stabilize a system that refused to grow. And your guilt? It's the residue of being turned into a symbol, instead of being treated like a person. Let this land. You weren't responsible for their disappointment. You weren't created to keep the peace. You weren't wrong for needing more than what they offered. But when everyone around you is committed to the illusion, your sanity will always feel like a betrayal. And that's why the guilt doesn't fade, even when the truth becomes undeniable. Because part of you still believes, if I just go back, if I just apologize, maybe I can make it easier for everyone. That's not logic, that's survival. Take a moment to think about your own experiences. When you think about walking away, what story floods your mind? That you're cruel, cold, ungrateful? Whose voice is that? And when did it become yours? Because guilt has a voice, and it often sounds like the person you had to keep pleasing to feel safe. Let's be exact. Guilt in trauma systems isn't a signal of wrongdoing. It's a signal that you're breaking the pattern. So when it shows up, you're not failing. You're reprogramming. And that ache in your chest, that pull to fix things, explain yourself, smooth it over, that's the echo of a nervous system that still confuses love with loyalty, and loyalty with silence. So how do you begin to untangle that? To stop confusing guilt with goodness? To let yourself walk away without apologizing for healing? Let's talk about that next, because the next phase isn't peace, it's grief. So you finally saw it, named it, stopped pretending. You laid down the role. You stopped making yourself the problem. You chose truth over compliance. And for a moment, you expected relief. But what you felt instead? Numbness, dread, silence. Not peace. Grief. Here's the lie most people believe, that once you leave the toxic system, once you stop carrying their shame, you'll feel free. But in reality, the first phase of healing isn't freedom, it's collapse. Your nervous system isn't celebrating, it's recalibrating. Because even if the system was cruel, it was familiar. And now, without it, your body has no map. We'll pause here for a moment. What emotions hit you right after you got out? Was it clarity or confusion? Did your body feel lighter or hollow? This isn't failure. It's reorientation, and no one prepares you for it. Let's go clinical. In trauma recovery, this is called the backlash of deactivation. When you're inside a high alert system, always anticipating, placating, adjusting, your body runs on cortisol, adrenaline, hypervigilance. That becomes your normal. But when the stressor is gone, your system crashes. The silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like absence, like threat. Not because you miss the chaos, but because your body was calibrated to it. This is what therapists call the trauma vacuum. You remove the system, but the wiring remains. So you walk around with space where pain used to be, and your brain scrambles to make sense of the quiet. Should I go back? Was it really that bad? Maybe I'm just overreacting. That's not confusion. That's addiction withdrawal from emotional intensity disguised as connection. Let's get even sharper. Most scapegoats don't just grieve the family they left. They grieve the fantasy they had to kill. The fantasy that if they were just good enough, quiet enough, patient enough, they'd finally be chosen. That dream, it dies after the boundary. Not before, because you can't let go of the illusion until you've finally stopped chasing it. Take a moment to reflect. What dream did you secretly keep alive, even as you pulled away? Was it the apology? The call? The moment they'd finally say, "You were right"? That dream isn't pathetic. It was your nervous system's last hope. And now that it's gone, you're not weak. You're just finally grieving the parent or partner or family that never arrived. This grief is not sentimental. It's cellular. Because part of your identity was built around being the one who needed less, the one who absorbed, translated, explained. And now, without that identity, you don't just feel lost, you feel unreal. Because if you're not the peacekeeper, not the emotional translator, not the shield, then who are you? That question, unasked for decades, is what you're sitting in now. So when people say, "You're so brave for walking away," you nod politely. But inside, you're falling apart, because they don't see the internal collapse that follows liberation. They don't see the guilt withdrawal, the body panic, the aching need to just feel familiar pain one more time, just to remember who you were. That's the paradox. You weren't addicted to them. You were addicted to the version of you that survived through service. And now that version is gone or dying, and the grief is real. Pause here. Ask yourself, what identity are you mourning? The caretaker? The strong one? The resilient one who never needed anything? That identity kept you alive, but it also kept you alone, and you're allowed to grieve that. Here's the philosophical truth. Grief is not the enemy of healing. It is healing. It's your nervous system integrating the truth. You were never too much. You were just too awake. And now, for the first time, you're learning to live without the distortion. No applause, no role, just reality. That's where the real healing begins. But now that you've named the grief, what happens when they come back? Because they always do. Not to reconnect, to test the waters, to see if the old version of you still exists. Let's talk about that next. The return test. You've been quiet, clear, committed to the distance. You didn't just walk away. You stopped engaging the role. No more justifying, no more explaining, no more bending to make others comfortable. And just as the fog begins to lift, they show up. Not with accountability, not with clarity, with subtlety. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. A like on a story about healing, a message sent late on your birthday, your milestone, your moment of softness. Coincidence? No. This is the return test. Let's define it clinically. The return test is a strategic re-entry, not to reconnect, to measure how much control they still have. Because in systems like these, your silence is not interpreted as growth. It's perceived as a threat. Have you ever received a vague message just when you were starting to feel okay again? Did it make you question everything? Your boundaries, your clarity, your choice? That's not random. That's regulation. Not yours, theirs. The system isn't used to your distance. They're used to access, to the version of you that responded immediately, gently, guiltily. So when that version goes quiet, they panic. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the role you played in them. You were the emotional translator, the guilt buffer, the compliant one who folded to keep the illusion intact. And when that disappears, they reach, not with connection, with bait. Here's the psychology. Narcissistic systems don't pursue closure. They pursue control. Closure is mutual. Control is unilateral. So the message isn't an apology. It's a probe. Are you still available to play the old role? And here's the trick. The message sounds soft, harmless, even nostalgic. Just thinking of you. You crossed my mind. Remember when we... But behind the warmth lives one question. Do I still own emotional real estate inside you? Think back to your situation. Ask yourself, what did I feel the moment I saw that message? Did I feel grounded or destabilized? Was I pulled into connection or confusion? That instability is the test. And if you respond from that place, the old contract reactivates, even if just for a moment. Let's get sharper. These return attempts often happen at specific inflection points, after milestones, during low moments, when they see you thriving without them. Because control isn't about presence, it's about timing. They're not checking in, they're reattaching, and they'll do it in a way that makes you question your progress. Here's the core contradiction. You were punished for leaving, but now you're being pulled back without apology. That's not care, that's control maintenance. Because if you truly outgrow the system, they lose more than access. They lose the illusion that they were never the problem, and your growth threatens that illusion. Focus on how it makes you feel. What part of you still wants to respond, to soothe, to clarify, to be the bigger person? Whose peace are you protecting with your politeness? That's the pull, not to connect, to re-perform. But you don't owe performance, especially not to people who only reach when you stop playing your part. Philosopher Michel Foucault wrote, "Where there is power, there is resistance." Your silence is resistance. Your boundary is resistance. Your refusal to re-engage the emotional barter system. Rebellion. And rebellion doesn't look like yelling. It looks like clarity. It looks like saying nothing and meaning it. You don't need to block them out of spite. You don't need to respond to prove you're healing. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't re-explaining. It's observing. Notice the pattern. Notice the timing. Notice the part of you that still aches for connection, and sit with it. Don't punish it. Just don't follow it either. So what happens now? Now that you've seen the system, exited the role, and survived the test? What's left when the illusion is dead and the guilt no longer hooks you? That's what we end with. The final truth. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you finally stopped collapsing. Stopped collapsing your voice into politeness, your pain into diplomacy, your clarity into second-guessing. And for the first time, you chose peace without permission. Not because it was easy, but because continuing the performance had become unlivable. So what now? You're out. The guilt doesn't work. The illusion has cracked. And what you're left with is you. No role, no script, no job of emotional translator, appeaser, scapegoat, savior. Just you. Take a look inside. Who started calling you cold the moment you got boundaries? Who said you'd changed when you finally spoke plainly? What version of you were they more comfortable with? And what does that say? You weren't cast as the scapegoat because you were weak. You were cast because you saw too much. And systems built on denial need someone to carry the tension, to be the problem, the flare, the deflection. You weren't punished for being bad. You were punished for being correct too early. The pain you've been carrying all these years, the self-doubt, the guilt, the shame, the hyper-independence, none of it began inside you. It was assigned strategically. Because if you believe you're the problem, you'll keep trying to fix yourself instead of seeing the system for what it was. And that's the final tether. So no, you're not broken. You were the proof that something was off all along. The one who cracked the spell. The one who left the stage, mid-scene, and refused to play a role that cost you your soul. And that's not abandonment. That's return. If you finally stopped performing, if you walked away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving the version of you that doesn't shrink. Comment below. That was the moment I met the real me. Your words might be the mirror someone else is scared to hold. And if this helped you understand scapegoating not as weakness, but as proof you saw the system too clearly, subscribe to the channel. This is where psychology gets sharp, where philosophy meets survival, and where your clarity is no longer a liability. The next video might not just validate your story, it might rewire it. So I'll see you there. But more importantly, you'll see you there